And today we begin episode 56 of Titans of Today with Shivaji Dasgupta. He is the founder and managing advisor of TAD Venture, which specializes and focuses on delivering real world AI value using data and AI for mid caps and private equity backed companies. And so today, what we're going to be discussing is how businesses can be more intelligent and more specific when it comes to not just how do we adopt AI, how do we get generative AI into our workflows, but really what matters. And that's how do we connect it into the hands of our people so that it generates real world value and becomes a foundation of a long term business booster. So, with that, Shivaji, welcome to Titans Up Today.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Thanks for having me. Really a pleasure.
Absolutely. And now let's talk because I think when we had originally spoke, you mentioned some of the things that you've done with the universities and how you initially started out in physics and have started to realize that, hey, my next step when it comes to real world business is applying those same kind of understandings and philosophies and principles into helping businesses generate real world value with AI. So talk more about that.
Basically, when just zooming back and forth a little bit, when I was doing physics, I was doing a lot of data analysis because the part of physics which I was working on was quantum computation. And although we were doing a lot of experimental work with quantum computers, and I was actually building chips, which I was testing, at the end, I was also doing a lot of simulations, just checking the theory and the results, if they were compatible and they aligned with the results. That kind of has struck a chord with me throughout my career, right? Bringing data and analysis together, analyzing the data, and then taking a decision on which direction to go. And also sometimes going into the data without preconceived notions and letting the data talk and helping me get the answers. Now, AI has helped me or helped all of us do that on steroids, bring out the insights from the data. And actually, in the last year, I personally had a very interaction with AI on the personal side, not only professional, where my father was actually going through his cancer treatment. He was diagnosed with cancer. And when we were looking for his and talking to multiple doctors, one hospital in India actually I found which was using AI to personalize the hormone therapy before they even started the radiation therapy. And actually, it has been short of a miracle that within less than 4 months, he has been now completely cancer free and he's just taking medicines for the next years. And that shows how impactful AI can be, where some treatments or some medications, which were till last year being tried on everybody just generically, can be personalized and made to fit for that particular type of cancer, that particular type of person, and his background based on his blood results and so on. So that actually made it very tangible for with all the work that I've done at the different banks, insurances, and bringing the efficiencies. This particular episode really made it really quite tangible for me how impactful AI can be in saving lives in the true sense.
When it's personalized, when it's your father, it's
Exactly.
hits much harder,
It's hit
which
much
turns
harder.
into drive. And I'm sure that the way your mind works, you're able to see, and maybe we can kind of walk through a little bit of that, but you're able to see how you went from the percent chance of success within that treatment. You look at the general cases versus what your father was able to achieve with the very targeted approach and kind of some of the factors that were identified in the personalization process. Do you have some insight on that, specifically from the medical, about what they were able to find and how they were able to change it? Because where I want to take that from there is imagine all the businesses that
Right.
have these data points and they don't really think that there's a possibility.
Right.
They might just, they're out old. They're like, "We have these data points, but it doesn't, who matter? We should just do more volume and maybe it'll work versus very targeted, personalized types of approaches to solving real world problems."
I mean,
Insight on that.
exactly. Would not have exact numbers because that's much more medical. And what I do know is when we were having discussions with other sets of doctors, what they had said was a completely different line of treatment, where also he would have to do the hormone therapy, but then they were proposing more operations and more invasive kind of treatments. Even if we would have done that line of treatment, all the doctors who were proposing that had left us with about an 80 to 85% chance of complete removal of the cancer and areas where cancer had hit. On the other hand, when we went to this doctor, and this was a pretty new hospital, and they were actually claiming that their treatment, they had patented a couple of things around this. When I started talking to them, they said, look, we've had 100% success in about 95% of the cases. In the 5% of the cases, we are still investigating and working with the client, working with the doctors and the patients, but we've not lost any patients. So actually, if you look at it this way, it's 100% life survival rate and 95% of removal of cancer. That was at least, that's something they were promising. And we went in with that. The only reason where we had some questions was because this hospital was much farther away, and my dad would have to go there every day and travel quite a distance. That had brought some questions. But other than that, and also the price was much higher. But other than that, in my mind at least, there was no doubt to go ahead and try this treatment. We talked to the broader group of doctors. Some of them said, look, this can be a little bit tricky because you're not removing invasively the cancer growth, and this may just grow. But thankfully, the treatment worked pretty quickly. And we saw that it will work because we started the treatment around October. And by the end of November, his blood tests were already showing that he was cancer free. But we knew that whatever growth was there, it was still there. It was just not growing. So that's why we had to do the radiation for another 30 days and remove it.
And then as you experienced that, you had already been working in, again, kind of supportive fields and same principles. And then you realize, imagine if businesses could be able to do these same kind of things. Because let's say if it's with growth or customer support or
Exactly.
with executive decision making, there's so much data that likely exists in a business. A large percentage of it is not even utilized, and the percent that is might not be the full picture
Right.
because they're not disparate data points which are connected to their particular outcomes. And that's where you really dived in AI in practical real world use cases. So where are businesses today when it comes to this level of understanding? You mentioned the 95.5. How can they become where are they at today in their potential, and where could they be within a short period of time if they use the right targeted approaches?
Right. So, taking a couple of steps back, I think I'll tell you a journey which most of these companies have made, some of them in a positive sense and some of them not so positive. They're still discovering. So, when I was at McKinsey and also supporting the clients on their tech strategy and also helping them define, let's say, tech driven products or data driven products, one of the realizations that I had was there were companies which would allow the data to speak for itself, and then they would analyze the inferences which they can have from the data. And then there were companies which would go in with preconceived notions and look for the answers to the questions which they already had. And more often than not, they already knew the answers. They were just trying to look for validation in the data. The second set of companies were the ones which are still stuck and are not progressing because they are still using this world of data analytics and AI to validate their own preconceived hypothesis. And also, in most of the cases, they are using AI in a very narrow sub process automation kind of an area. This is where I would say that there's no chance of them doing anything wrong, but there's no disruption. There's no massive impact. The costs they have for implementing AI is still there, but they don't get the impact that they were expecting to because they are not doing an end to end revamp or a transformation of the process. The first group of companies, on the other hand, they started actually seeing that if they would have a data driven approach and through that implementing AI, they would need to actually revamp, transform their entire operations, end to end processes. And that's when they are starting to get the biggest impact and biggest results from use of data and AI. Just in terms of numbers, you were saying companies sit on a lot of data. Most of the times that I've seen, whether it's banks or insurances, which are the industries I know really well, but also mid-cap companies where I'm working with them on their finance processes, where I'm working with them on their back-end processes. Most of these companies use maximum 15 to 20% of the data that they have. 70% of the data that they have is not used. Why is that? Because either it's unstructured in terms of emails, in terms of PDF documents, in terms of whatever Word documents that they have, or they are not understood or labeled or annotated properly to be used for AI or to actually generate any knowledge out of it. This is already a big battle you're fighting, right? If you're not using even the data that you have. The 15, 20% of the data that they use, they do not annotate or they do not label properly. So every time they meet that data, they are reconnecting to that data or reusing the data or relabeling that data for different use cases, which means there's no holistic analysis or there's no holistic view on this data or the process or the results which are coming. Those are the kind of challenges which I see can be resolved pretty quickly because now you have off-the-shelf solutions for most of these challenges, and most of these companies can actually tap into that.
So I go back to, and you probably heard this study, it's about 2021-ish, maybe, that it came out from McKinsey, where they said they made 3 lines. One is AI leaders,
Mhm.
the next is adopters, and the last is laggards. And they made the course of 20 years of where these companies would be given or based on their level of AI adoption. And the AI leaders were far and above
Right.
in their overall market cap over that period of time.
All right.
And something you mentioned there is really important because a lot of companies will bring in generative AI and or already have into a specific process, which is great, and they'll get some value.
Right.
Yet to an AI leader and the right way it seems to build businesses moving forward, now it's actually just 15 years out, 2040, would be to do exactly what you're saying. And that
Right.
is think about bottom up.
Mhm.
How is this business ran? What data is being collected? How is it being
Exactly.
utilized? And how then are you structuring a system around that so that every bit that can be optimized is being optimized? And then your people are just associated and allocated into new areas that are buoyed by those
Mhm.
processes and
Mhm.
those approaches.
Mhm.
So, being that you've worked with everything from startups to mid caps to large organizations, what is in your mind the way a company can now approach this problem? Because to a lot, it sounds
Mhm.
like that's
Mhm.
so much. How do all that?
Yeah.
What thoughtful approach that you would bring into the picture?
So I think I would do a very structured approach. And I now you hear the pitch that I do to most of the companies. It's actually not that difficult. You start analyzing very clearly, or even maybe before the analysis, step one is understanding what is AI versus what is generative AI. I think in most leadership, and this is not just for technology leadership, it's also for the business leadership to understand what is the difference, where is the value that I can get from data analysis, analytics versus AI versus generative AI. Generative AI is not a solution that can help in every single problem. If you want to do next best offer, just for example, generative AI probably is not the correct solution for you. If you want to rechange the process and generate content for some customers and generate products or generate information, that's where generative AI would be important. In other cases, you have the discriminant AI. So those are the kind of areas where I start talking to the companies. Do you even understand? Are you doing AI for the sake of doing AI because everybody's talking about it? Or are you doing AI because you really want to change the way your company's processes are done? Once they get that, the second level is understand the business processes and the business needs. How and where can really the use cases, benefits come from. Lay them out, do a proper analysis end to end. And this is not, I'm saying, a 6-month exercise. This can be done within 3-4 days, bringing the right stakeholders together. This is what I do in a 2-week period, understanding which are the 2025 areas where AI, generative AI separately can generate value for their industry. Thereafter, the next step is to really understand, do we want to build the AI solutions that we need versus do we want to use off the shelf solutions? And the same is true for generative AI. In generative AI, there is an additional difference. Most of the companies that I'm talking about that we are discussing today will not, in the course of their journey, create a new foundational model. They just don't have the investments and the resources to do that. They are going to use off the shelf foundation models, and there are quite a few now, including from the US, China, and even from Europe. Based on that, do you even want to create your own RAG models with the data? And that's where the question comes in. If you want to do that because your data is sensitive, your use case is very sensitive, and there are companies I work with which want to do that in defense and so on. But then you need to understand, which data do I need? How do I annotate that data for training for the generative AI model or even for normal AI models? Or look, my data I have, but there is an agent of the market which I can take and I can just train that agent on my data with very little effort. And in some cases, some of these agents also have AI tools which would annotate the data on its own with some subject matter expertise. So very little effort required. That's the journey that's required and the thinking and the structure that requires if you really want to use AI and GenAI. I hope that makes sense.
Mhm. Now, definitely does. And starting from that foundation, and you've made the differentiation between what can be called classical AI from generative AI from now, and you use the term agent there, and how there's now this burgeoning marketplace of different agents that do different things. Before we get deeper into those, which are great to get deeper into and some real world use cases, give, give an eye on what's next, what's coming beyond the fold of agents, because everyone's obsessed with agents right now, yet we see what happens time and time again in technology. As soon as something becomes obsessed over, there's a million solutions that are created that are all great and do this particular thing. Yet it's always often about what's next. That's where kind of the
Mm,
next level of 10x value comes from. So,
right.
what's your eye on that?
Very far out, let's say, at least from my perspective. I know there are people who would say that's not very far out. It's like next year. But I have my opinion. So I beg to differ. I think a little bit far out is the emotion part, getting the emotions and really replicating the human touch in these agents. Because so far, the agents that we are using are still lacking that, right? And also, this is pretty much a machine driven exercise, and um, that human, and for lack of a better word, the human emotion is still missing. So I think that in getting included, and there's a lot of work that's going on there. The other part is building up on the multimodal parts, like combining not just the text generation, but also text and graphic, and probably graphic in motion. Those are the kind of things where I see a lot of development. And I'm actually quite positive about the developments in those multimodal areas, multimodal generation. The third bit, which I think is not that far and which is very promising for me, what I see as quote unquote innovative, is how do I bring all these different agents? And this is a point which you just mentioned. There's going to be an inflation of agents at work if we really start adopting Gen AI. How do you connect all these? How do you govern all this for better management? How do you make sure that the data is prepared in a way that it's being used by all these agents simultaneously and not just singular agents, and you have to re-prepare the data and so on? That's an area where And on top of it, if I may just add one more point, the security of all these agents and the quality assurance of all these agents, that's an area where I see in total massive work happening and breakthroughs expected. So I think starting from very far ahead, like the emotions part, then the multimodal, and very close, that would be the security, quality assurance, and in general, governance of multi agents.
And now to go back into that wider view, as that was all excellent, we'll probably build back into that at some point or
Sure.
kind of sparkle it in. One of the other elements that I see as well is when you look at top business producers when it comes to different industries, businesses that really crush it and do far beyond what 99% of other businesses or people do, they follow very specific frameworks. And
Right.
so if you go to ChatGPT right now, yes, they have all this information, yet even if you prompt it and you're asking and you're working on it, even for a specific use case, you're likely still going to miss so much
So,
of what those businesses are doing. So I think there's a big framework gap. And so what this would look like in the real world is, so let's say a bank is going to use generative AI to accelerate their support tickets and properly route and handle what can be handled with generative AI.
right.
When it comes down to it, there's a delta that comes from, okay, we have 30% of our tickets that are routed to this agent, which handles it, which great. We just saved 30% of human time. Yet, if we look at other areas like marketing or sales and other kind of, you can keep going with different domains, there's also a massive delta that's going to come from
Yes.
really honing those in to not just be generative AI and leverage the base model, but also to use these frameworks that are intertwined with the way humans really think. And like you're saying, the emotion part, it's what really drives conversion or what really drives a better result or what actually in our customer support ticket isn't just what makes the person say, okay,
Mhm.
but makes the person go, that was a really great experience. I
Right.
think there's a frame element
And on
that's
top,
lacking. So
I would completely second what you're saying. And sorry to interrupt, but also the part of bias, right? Human emotions have led us over the last years, multiple hundreds of years, take decisions. Take the example of credit. At a bank, you give out credit, and that's based on a lot of data. But if you look in the history, in the 30 years ago, 40 years ago, irrespective of having the data, a lot of these decisions were also made just on the relationship that the banker had with the client. And that was based on emotions. So, how do you replicate that, which kind of a relation has started giving us some bias in the data? Because this client or this banker always had relationships with specific types of clients. And that's why most of our credit decisions were based on a specific bias. Those will be pretty interesting to explore once we can replicate that. But even beyond that, I would give you an example. What I did in the last 6 months working for one family office backed company, it was a tax advisor. And they wanted to answer very specific questions on Italian tax in the context of foreigners coming to Italy and having some tax deals and so on and so forth. Now, as you rightfully said, whether it's Perplexity, ChatGPT, if you ask these kind of questions, you would get pretty good answers. But can you be really sure? Is it narrow enough? Is it a research based answer? And that's the reason using GPT, Claude, as well as Llama, we have built a model for them using 500 documents, which were downloaded from the internet, publicly available tax judgments from the Italian tax authority. And we have been able to take this information and built out the tool for him which he's using, and it acts like a GPT agent where he can chat with it, but he can create summaries of these answers or even fully fledged tax statements and research statements, which he can use to have conversations with the client. And it gives a recommendation, but also gives you the sources where you can check for it. So, this is where I think if you really want to have industry specific agents, you would still need to use that. But then again, there are off-the-shelf solutions available for that. Like now, just for tax, you have so many solutions which are available in the market. Some of them work equally good as our solutions. Some of them are still struggling. But I think the future, we would have more industry tailored agents, but that's already coming right now. And many of the big techs would probably integrate these also, sometimes even free of cost, into their already available search engines.
Now let's talk about the barriers of different organizations. Mention maybe some of the ones that you've worked with that you've seen personally, or
Right.
just generally from what you've seen in the market and its current level of adoption.
Mhm.
What are some of these barriers when it comes to taking the approaches? One of them you mentioned is time, and you said, for example, that it doesn't have to take weeks or months to really plan and identify. You could actually do it in a workshop. Everybody's focused for 3, 4 days, and you get it nailed down. Time is a big one. Yet I think there's psychological barriers and, hey, we're not sure how our business is gonna show up. We're not sure about reliability or
Right.
predictability of the kind of model's performance, and some of the things you talked about, governance and QA. What are, if you were to list out the barriers that are stopping businesses and how maybe
Right.
they can reframe and see those from a different
Right.
perspective?
I would say the bottom line for this, I would cluster in two blocks. The bottom line for the hurdles, one is skills. And now when we talk of skills, we can deep dive and go down the path completely. But on skills, basically there are three main blocks. One is the current leadership, senior as well as mid manager leadership. They do not understand how this impacts and how they can use this to their advantage. This is where I meant sitting down with them, just explaining what is AI. It does not take long. A 5 hour conversation done well, they would understand. And they would also understand that AI is not a switch which you plug on and off. You need the pipeline of data. And that's why you need to concentrate on the data to deliver AI. My previous company, I introduced a KPI, which was return on invest on data, where we were actually improving the quality of the data and as well as availability of data, but showing the return by the impact from analytics, AI, and GenAI. This helped the senior manager to actually understand. So, one of the big blocks coming back is the skill and the understanding of AI. The other challenge within skill is if you find people who can implement AI or at least talk about it, many of them are theorists. They do not have the industry experience to actually help you understand how to implement this in a big company context. Not all big companies are research institutes. Not all big companies are R&D companies, right? So you need to actually tailor the AI and Gen AI to be adopted and to be tailored for the use cases and the business that we are working in. On the other hand, the second block that I was talking about was the putting the AI into production. And that's where you have, again, maybe two sub issues. One is when you want to put AI into production, you actually have to run through all the production challenges which any IT software had to run through, right? Is it free of issues of cybersecurity? Is it secure in our environment? Can it be put into production? Can it be accessed by data and can it be accessed by other people in the company? The second challenge is every company has existing projects and existing IT challenges. And now you are just trying to bring this new topic on top without actually thinking, how do I create a platform, something like an AI ops platform that I call, so that this AI solution can go from pilot to production immediately. And you don't have to do a pilot in isolation. and then think of how to bring it into production in a separate platform. So those are for me the two big areas. One is the IT and putting into production, and the other one, which is a much bigger one, is the skill in the companies, which is the roadblock to success.
Now, what is then, given there's a multivariate flow of factors there, what is the right model by which to approach this when communicating with executives? How would you go about saying, hey, when we are coming in, we can identify exactly where AI needs to go in a
Right,
short period of time. We can identify potentially where some ROI is and how we're going to track it. Yet, here's how we need to be prepared for when
right.
we go and it's the road. We need to move a few things around, which might be in production already. Talk about how there's
Yeah.
establish the right model, make sure those things get done.
So basically, what I do now is, first of all, try and find out, is there a software as a solution, off the shelf model that can help them remediate the problem immediately without having to build? Because anything that you build has a cost factor that has a capex versus opex factor, right? If you're using something off the shelf, it's much more opex, much easier on the business plan. So that is the first thing that I do. Secondly, if this is something that I have to integrate, the people from IT are from day one on board, whose data, whose system will be integrated. And we very quickly understand what are the interfaces needed. How can this be done light touch? So if we need data from a system, what are the data pipelines already available? Can we use them? And if we require all the data from this pipeline, can this already be labeled using the tool that we are bringing in instead of creating a new pipeline? Because any new pipeline that needs to be created has costs associated with it. So as minimal invasive, if I may, similar to the medical treatment going back, as minimal invasive into operations, into systems as we can be, that's the easiest way to scale the implementation. The second thing that I do is the implementation of these tools comes already with the first step of the AI ops platform, so that whatever implementation we are doing in parts, we already start building the AI ops platform. You do not need to build the operations platform with all the features immediately. You take and select the features which you need for that particular use case and you start scaling. And thirdly, the upskilling, skill of the people. You take the people on the journey. Obviously, the more data you have on your hands, the better you learn. But also, who are learning sessions, just sitting down and talking to experts from the industry. I bring in my friends, I bring in my colleagues from other companies, ex colleagues, and also just doing the one-on-one schooling and teaching. That's something that has helped. So these kind of 3, 4 factors.
What is the AI ops platform that most organizations should be using? Well, let's say they're a mid cap.
So what we have now created, and a little bit of self-marketing maybe. So what I've created with some of my colleagues, and this is a separate startup, which I'm also helping. Although it's a startup, the friends of mine who have set this up, they're all experienced engineers and experienced consultants. They have created an off-the-shelf AI ops platform where you can just take and plug and play your solutions. Why is this helpful? Because this already has the security solutions, quality assurance solutions, as well as the modularity to connect to all agents. So you can actually connect to any agent, train it, or you can connect to any foundation model and train it. If you're using AI, just plain simple AI, not generative AI, you can actually build on this platform your own AI solutions. The experimenting landing zone where you can actually do the piloting is already built in. So you don't have to go through all the hoops of security clearance, etc. It's all there in this kind of a platform. Why is this better? And to your question, what should they be using? If you go to any cloud provider, and having worked with different cloud providers in different cloud migrations in my past careers, they do offer these functionalities for sure. But for every company, once you go there, you have to build that with your own engineers, with the cloud engineers, and actually create your own tenancy. At the same time, once you've built it, just think about moving out of that cloud at some point. If you have negotiation issues or if they are raising costs, you have a in that context. That's the reason why I'm proposing to some of my clients and also people I'm working with, at least the AI operations platform where you're building your AI use cases and scaling them. This is something that should be compatible with all cloud platforms, but a little bit outside the cloud platform.
And so, what are some of the key uses that you've seen in terms of agents?
So
And
where
how do
I've
you particularly define agents
so
versus what might be generally known?
there are two or three cases where I've been involved on agents. One of them at one of my previous companies, where we built a knowledge database agent at UniCredit. I took the data from all the knowledge bases, connected it to the agent. And the main reason for doing that was actually quite interesting. Our clients, when they would go to the relationship officers and have very specific questions on which form do I need for tax, which forms do I need to fill out so that I can get some government discount or whatever. Our relationship advisors, because they were such specific questions, would actually call the back office, who would then collate all the information from all the databases, prepare an answer for the relationship advisor, who would then give it to the clients, generally taking somewhere between 2 hours to up to 1 or 2 days, like depending on the question. Now, what we have done is connecting all these databases to the agent, where the relationship officer can actually ask the question, get the answer with the forms and the sources connected to it. After a lot of testing, we have now released it to our own relationship officers after I've left UniCredit. And even within the time I was there, the business case and what we were promising was already amazing. We could actually replace most of the people in the back office who were answering these questions and repurpose them for better use of their time rather than just collating information from the knowledge bases. The other area, so this part of knowledge base, knowledge databases is something which I'm seeing almost at every company that, answering questions. This is something which agents are doing. The other area in insurances, which I'm also seeing for agents, is around getting data from not only their own, but also from the internet so that they can actually decide what is the right amount or what is the right claims resolution amount that needs to be paid for example, a car damage, an evergreen problem. You want to straight through process these kind of challenges. Some of them you can, but the more unique these become, the more difficult it becomes to resolve these kind of claims. And there, so far, you've been having lots of humans in the loop. And this agent can actually then just see the information from the internet and say, if this car was damaged in this country, and this is the part, more or less, this is the range of the claim that can be settled with them. The other area within PE, which I'm actually quite gung ho about, is the pre deal part, where I'm seeing a lot of agents now, and some of them are quite good. One or two I'm working with, they are actually helping the investment team analyze all the data that you get from the data rooms pre-deal. This used to be a big challenge, understanding that the name which has been shortened in this document is the same name which is in the other document. Bringing all this information, and actually you would need army of to type all this information in an Excel table, collate all this information. This is something that has become very easy in the investment space with the data room analysis. And now some of these agents which I'm working with, they also connect to the internet and give you a full-fledged report, not only a business Excel report, but also a full-fledged report saying, hey, compared to the other company on the internet that I found, your company is actually better placed, or this deal could actually have XYZ advantages, or this is a sector that you could actually look at. So those are the kind of things that I'm looking at on a broad scale, banks, insurances, or knowledge management as a whole. The fourth one, which I have seen and I'm quite kicked up about as well, is again, which I was talking about, the multimodal, working with a startup where they are actually creating comics. And that could actually revolutionize knowledge management completely, where you can actually create comics using GenAI and completely take any sort of literature, whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's knowledge, and create this kind of comics, which adults are more probably adept to. Some studies show that they can learn better. And so those are the kind of use cases that I see.
And as part of this, at the first step is the quantification of the current state to understand, like in the first agent example there, that this took a few hours to a day or two, all the way down to now you can just
Right,
interact, get that information, and that relationship manager is not only able to serve that particular client better, but they're on to the next client faster, which is what I was talking about, even from a frameworks perspective. Some of
right,
these things where is the value of speed in a business is
right,
incredibly high. So if you're
right,
conversating with a prospect or your client and you're able to give them an answer faster and help them make a decision faster, they are going to love that experience. They're going to feel rewarded from that
right,
experience, and you're going to do that again and again
right.
versus, hey, let me get back to you. I don't have that information at the moment. They wait a day. Now they're not available the next time you call, and now it's 4 days later, and you're finally able to get back on the line. These kind of things in business happen every single day. And a lot of businesses do not see these as problems. They just see these
Right,
as that's the way it is
right.
versus here's how we could actually 10x our customer experience by being
Yeah,
faster, smoother. It starts with just being able to understand where those friction points are, what's slow,
absolutely.
where are our team members and our business itself not being able to be a better servant to our customers.
Absolutely. And this is where I was just giving you some examples which I'm working on right now and have worked on. But there are so many other examples. Just look at pricing. If you are not pricing your product correctly based on the customer preferences, or if the customer is getting a feeling that I am being not being given the best price, you lose that customer, not just that time, but you'll probably lose the trust forever. And that's why just having the end to end understanding of what type of a customer this is, customer segmentation, place the product on the right platform for this customer, and have the right pricing. That entire process in most companies is extremely fragmented. And even if they are AI savvy, let's say, even today, I'm seeing banks and even other companies, industry companies, treat these things individually. So, one of the companies that I worked with, which was PE backed in the last months, they had a massive issue because, on one hand, their customers were buying stuff, but actually giving them bad NPV scores. On the other hand, their inventory was extremely full. So they could not get it. Why are the customers still buying it, although they are giving us bad scores? And why is our inventory so full? What actually came out of the analysis was these people are not talking to each other. The inventory is actually stocking up stuff which the customer is not buying, and the stuff which the customer is buying, the price for those products are not placed correctly. And the inventory manager thinks that the customer, once they have bought product A, they would immediately buy the product B. That's why he's stocking up on product B. But because the customer is already giving a bad NPV on product A, they are not buying product B. And those kind of connected stories, let's say, or connected analysis is not happening in many companies. If I go to the CFO of that company and start asking, have you looked at this kind of data? It's not even AI or Gen AI. It's plain simple data connectivity, which is missing in most of the cases.
Right.
But then if you had a Gen AI agent, let's say, which was managing the full end to end flow, these kind of things would not happen. And that's where I think we are still far away from there. But I think this is where we need to start thinking how to connect the dots and how to create agents if we really want to have the transformation of an end-to-end process agent and not just sub-process agents, like a pricing
Mhm.
agent or a customer interaction agent or just a knowledge management agent in that sense.
It connects back to that ground up approach instead of here's that, let's pop something in,
Right.
see how, and then even likely, as we've seen in the media and the headlines, let's say, I think it's changing a little bit over the last 6 months or so.
Right.
Yet, we could just focus on finance as one. There was these stats coming out that 70% of these implementations are not having the ROI. And it comes down to exactly what we're talking about. It's they're looking at a top down, here's customer support, let's bring this in. And then for whatever reason, maybe that project doesn't get executed properly, maybe it's not designed properly, maybe they're not quantifying what was the before and the after, or even some of those other type factors like customer experience and
Right.
improving the customer experience that leads back into. So there's a misquantification that's occurring. And then again, it's also if you're not doing it from the ground up, if you're not getting that data interconnectivity, then you're not even utilizing it for what it really could be anyways. And so if
Agree.
you're trashing, maybe we just need to go back to human only. Maybe, you're going to be moving backwards instead of learning from your failure and moving forwards and saying, yes, we need a better data interconnectivity. If we do that, then we'll be able to really hit that ROI and not only a ROI, but a
Right.
better business, fast business and better customer experience.
No, I totally agree. It's like saying, okay, if somebody has, excuse my pun, like fat fingers and has a problem punching the right numbers on a calculator, that does not make the calculator useless. And we are not going to go back to using an abacus. So I think this is exactly where we are right now. We are seeing teething issues and we will see them for a while. But that's also the challenge we have with the technology, which is, if I may say so, it's more intelligent than how most business leaders have been working so far. So, if you are to use this intelligent technology in the right sense, you need to prepare your leadership to think the right way. And not just the leadership, the entire workforce need to prepare in the right way, because otherwise we are, as we say in Germany, throwing cannons at a sparrow.
Mm.
Throwing cannonballs at a sparrow, basically. Or this is too big of a solution to solve minute problems. To get the right return on invest, you really need to look at it holistically. And I agree with you. There are some changes people are understanding, but I think there's a lot that needs to be done. One of the neobanks in Israel that I have been interacting with has a right perspective on this, and I think they are very unique in that sense. They are already starting to think to get rid of their web team, which designs the web pages or their online banking apps. Because what they are saying is if generative AI really works properly, if I know the customer login, if I know the customer preferences and the historical interactions with the customer, why are we not generating content on the fly? And depending on what he clicks, what he wants to see, what he or she wants to keep diving deep in, the content gets generated at that moment. And this is something which I think not many companies are even thinking along. AI is not just about hyper personalization of your website where you are creating the content and generative AI is just placing it. It's actually creating the content on the fly and it may create a bar chart for you. And for me, it may create numbers on a cloud. I don't know. It can be completely different.
And it's the companies that are answering and exploring what I just wrote down as the evolving unknowns. Because if we go to our
Mhm.
factors, we talk about frameworks and multimodal and emotion and some of those other things that are emerging and will boost and make these things work better. It's also there's another factor, and that is the evolving unknowns. And it takes asking questions like that, exploring it, and even piloting it and figuring out
Exactly.
how you can put that to use. What is the cost versus one of the other? What is the actual how do the customers enjoy and experience it? And so there's a usability factor of how
Right.
the human brain is now going to be, just our everyday lives are going to evolve around these type of technologies, and really what does come next. Because if we look at how ChatGPT came out, it is, or let's say a Lovable or a Cursor. Cursor's a little different. Yet
Yeah.
the whole thing is, have you use Lovable?
Not yet. No.
So Lovable is a kind of that exact use case, but disconnected from a business process. It's
Okay.
you can go in, you have a single command line, you can punch it in and say, "Hey, make me an app that looks like this," and it'll generate that
Ah,
front end for
okay.
you, and then you can just iterate on that front end, so it'll spit that
Right.
out.
Right.
And so we've gone back to having it
Actually,
as
I've
simple
seen
as
I've seen other solutions like that, exactly what you said on, but they go half the way. This is something which is like the full hog. And this is exactly what you're saying. The unknowns are increasing and evolving. And how do we stay prepared for that?
Yeah, he was at JP Morgan Chase. I think this was maybe 25 episodes ago.
Okay.
And one of the things we talked about, because he's been in banking for 30 years,
Yeah.
is the biggest changes to the customer experience have been in interface. And that
Right.
was, for example, mobile. It wasn't just because banks started using cloud architecture and services, didn't make the customer's life change overnight. But what did is that they could now have conversations on the app, less conversations, but usable features on the app and manage their banking. And so as we look even forward, it's likely going to be what he said in the future of banking specifically was it's likely going to be more of something like that. Now, is it
Mm,
AR? Is it VR? Something like that, or what? Who we don't know what it's going to be yet. Yet sometimes the biggest changes in the customer life is just how you use the software and the
true.
technology.
So, I mean, that if we just stick to banking, and I've been in banking now like about 8 years, 9 years, and also before that as a consultant, the interesting thing is this entire digital wave, the banking product has not changed. The banking product still is the same. So the core of it is still a credit business. The core of it is still a financing business. What has changed is exactly that you mentioned the interactions that we have with the customers, the way the customer wants the product. Now, what has also changed to some extent is how these core products are placed for the customers. For example, you would have white label banking, loans, or financing available through different platforms. The biggest innovation, or quote unquote innovation, in the finance space or financing space has been actually the buy now, pay later. But again, none of the banks truly are involved in that, right? It's been driven from outside the banking environment. Where I see getting prepared for these kind of innovative evolution, and I like your statement there, the unknown evolution, evolving the unknowns. How can we be prepared? And there I have a very clear view. The simplified tech architecture that you have, the more you'll be prepared for the unknowns, because then bringing in new SaaS tools or bringing in a new development on top of your simplified stack is not that difficult, rather than having a very fragmented and a very complicated platform. And that's the reason why I personally believe that even if companies are moving to cloud, that does not mean that everything needs to be hard coded, cloud native, built onto the cloud, all the applications. In many cases, the SaaS route is probably the right route to go, even if it may increase consumption, but that still leverages today the simplicity which they would need tomorrow.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. And it seems that it is going to be humans that will architect those simplified tech architectures. There has to be, you
Think.
think, or AI will be the one
Interesting.
to propose new architectures.
So I think today we are not there yet, AI architecting anything. Is it a possibility? I think so. But I would have to see, before I can answer that completely, I would have to see AI architecting even something simpler. What I have seen today is AI architecting, if you can call that, solution interfaces, similar to what you were talking about. I have seen an app in Italy and it's called Mindfair. And they are actually doing very similar work. You ask it a simple question, create me an interface, it'll architect it, design it, and even deliver it, the code for it with the documentation. That's software architecting. Hard-coded system architecture or data flow architecture. I'm sure you can get there somewhere, but I would trust it more with a human in the loop, especially because, and this is a very important point, geographically, you have very different regulations, especially in banks, especially in insurances, also in PE industry, you have different regulations, you have different needs, privacy regulations in Europe versus, let's say, the US. These kind of architecture blueprints coming from AI may not, and I say yet, may not yet be tuned for completely these kind of specific needs. In the future, I'm sure this can be a possibility, but I would say we are a few steps removed from there yet. One of the simplest, or let's say most common questions, which are repeated quite a few times by every IT geek to generative AI and is probably challenged also, the mainframe migration, the architecture which is required to move out of mainframe into a standard software or modern software, the software that the codes that are required to move from COBOL to Java. Do we have that completely foolproof today? You will get a mixed answer, right? Some of the colleagues will say, no, it's completely ready. And many colleagues actually will tell you we are not there yet. We would still need human in the loop. We have made advancements for sure in the last 1.5 years, but we are not there to full-fledged scale these things.
Hmm. What are your thoughts on the different types of models when you're going out to choose a model that you're going to use for a particular use case or solution? What are your thoughts on O3 and 4.5 versus 4.0 and maybe even some of the other ones like DeepSeek when it comes to, is there one that you're choosing more than the other? Is it fit to the use case? Are you trying to choose just the best to make sure your outputs are the highest quality? And what kind of real differences are you seeing as models evolve?
To be honest, I have not seen massive differences so far. Okay, if you're talking about multimodal, etc., there are differences. But if you're just talking about text-based models, and this is what mostly I'm working on the generative AI, the text-based one, we were using GPT a lot, stopped using GPT for the consumption, started using Claude. Now GPT consumption has been tuned. So that's why the consumption question is not that much of a hindrance. And that's the results as far as I'm concerned, what I've seen. GPT, Claude, they're pretty comparable. Three, to be honest, most of the clients that I've been working with have been a little bit apprehensive of using the models. They would rather use the models coming from the US or Europe. So that's the European clients that I work with.
Hmm. I'm just looking back because I was architecting a solution and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So 4.1 Nano, and there's 4.1 Nano, there's 4.1 Mini now. You're
Uh,
aware of those?
no, these
Okay,
things
so
evolve like,
GPT,
yeah,
yeah. So there has been a common trend, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So 4.1, GPT 4.1 is the new
right.
API version of the model that's coming
That
out.
angle. Yeah, yeah.
So you basically your cost per 1 million tokens is about $10. And then if you go all the way down to Nano, your cost per 1 million tokens is about 50 cents, so 20 times
Mhm.
cheaper. How have you seen the are you just sticking with the ones because these are the newer models and they tend to lose with the
Right.
newer models, and I'm pretty sure if I scroll down here, the older ones, where is it now, the 4.0 is even more
Far out.
expensive than the do is they release the new ones and then they price it really low so that people use it, so it refines it and
Exactly.
improves, and then
Sure.
the cost comes back up.
So,
So in between those, are you still comfortable in a use case like some of the ones that you mentioned using
yeah.
those newer models, or you want to stick and price the tested and the baked ones?
No, look, in I would say almost 70 to 80% of the use cases that we have been working, we do use the new ones. And we are open to using because it's not so sensitive. It's not the medical do or die kind of situations.
Mhm.
But if there are compliance involved, if there is something like, let, because we are always having human in the loop approach, where think of the bank knowledge base example, there is the relationship manager which is still in between the customer. And that's why there is a possibility to remediate the answer and check for the answer and the accuracy. So we are not really worried about the models, the newer models. What we definitely do not do is in these kind of models, take it for the gospel truth, right? Just say, okay, this is the result which is coming out of it. We would test it a couple of times. And most of the times we are testing not only like GPT 4, 4.1 or 4.5 or Nano that you're saying, but actually we would test it against Claude or Mistral or any of these models and actually say, hey, are any of these models working, giving us a better accuracy? And sometimes we would actually choose depending on what answer you're looking at. In some cases, you want a very precise yes or no. In that case, we would use a different model compared to if you are looking just for a summary and you want to have a better accuracy rather than precision. So those are the kind of things that I look at when choosing a model. What are the questions? And that's why most of the times we are giving model access to multiple foundation models to actually run. And then depending on the specific question, the model chooses the foundation model.
And when it really comes down to it, model routing is not that difficult
No,
because if you're going,
exactly.
where are you going to go get the input? So let's say you're going to
Right.
scan a website. Input on a very low cost model, what is going to be the real difference?
Correct.
Probably not. It's not
Correct.
like GPT-4.1 at 20 times the cost is going to read a different thing on that website. It's just your scraper needs to use a different model or should, for cost
Exactly.
effectiveness, use a different model.
Exactly.
Then it should output that response, maybe summarized or simplified into your higher end model, which is going to do your content generation or your output, it would
Yeah.
seem.
I totally agree, right? And you're spot on because for me, in the last use cases and the implementations that I've been doing, the challenge is not on the model, but rather on the annotation, as you're saying, the scraper model or on the data that you're providing. Have you annotated properly? And many of the times we are seeing that the answers are better if the annotation is done in a particular way. So I totally agree with you. The challenge is no longer AI or the GenAI model or the RAG model, but it's much more the inputs and how is it available.
And what do you think about MCP?
You'll have to elaborate.
Model context protocol. So
Yeah.
essentially it's the I think
No, I meant
yeah,
not
MCP, model
not
context protocol.
MCP. I didn't need the full form. You have to elaborate.
Sure.
What do I mean by what in MCP?
Empowering agents to take actions on the browser and then what impacts and influences that can have. Because a lot of the
Right.
use cases we've talked about that are from a text-based perspective, yet if we're now getting into MCP where you can have a model take actions on the browser that a human would take, it's a totally different level, right? It's the next life of these models and how they can really have some impact that's not just input output, it's action and outcome.
Yeah. So actually, it's funny because just last afternoon, I was talking to one of my startups that I kind of mentor, and they were actually going down the route of creating AI security models. And now they have actually said, look, the challenge be like even before the model quality assurance, or we can be sure about the answers coming out of the model. Are we really sure that there is the context of the model is clear? The model context protocols for these MCPs are clear. And this is a very niche area that they are now starting to get in because what they are realizing is, especially if they have AI agents connecting to different agents or even to different legacy programs, the, if I may call it, the agent API needs to have these MCP in it. And I think other than Anthropic, I don't see a lot of these foundation models talk a lot about it. Anthropic is very openly talking about the MCP. At least I've seen that. Maybe the others I've not seen. But that's what I was discussing with the startup. And they are actually looking at creating this kind of an MCP as their service for all agents, which the companies may build on their own or even using off the shelf. And
Exactly.
I think that's a big area which we will see a lot of startups mushrooming in. So that's
Agreed.
why I wanted to understand what do you want me to talk about on that? Because it's not a very well established field yet.
And what about agent swarms?
Again,
Things
I
like
think,
Lindy or like
yeah. So I think what I'm seeing again, another startup which I'm working with, their USP, and working with stock exchange there because this stock exchange, just to give you a little bit of background, has been using a lot of these agents for a while, big, small, and also what they are getting a challenge in is the governance aspect of it. Again, this stock exchange is in Europe, so they are also governed by the AI Act. So just to understand how do you govern this kind of things? And this is where they are starting to look at, can we start looking at these kind of agent swarms, or how do we bring all of this into under one umbrella?
so if we were to now take this entire conversation and condense it down into one first principles of engineering practical real world value for your business from Shivaji, what would that be?
So if this is an established business, let's say, big legacy business, the first thing they should do is understand what is the relevance of data, what is the relevance of AI for their existence in the future. And this, I know they have probably heard this a zillion times from multiple consultants, but they really need to double click and understand deeper into how data and AI can revolutionize their business. And this does not need to be, as we were discussing, right, just on the top and big bang. It needs to be bottom up, really a good understanding of where the impact comes in. Number two, and probably simultaneously, identify the biggest business problems that they are trying to solve, whether it's mergers and acquisitions, whether it's efficiency, cost saving, whether it's increasing revenue with higher market reach. Understand the process that they would like to implement to get there, to get to the vision, and get an AI data expert on board to redesign this process completely using the AI lens. Then bring their own systems, bring their own IT on this map, and then map out the architect that they would need to implement to get this done. This can be done using off the shelf tools, agents, as we discussed a lot in detail. What are the components that they would need on top of these agents to manage them correctly, to have the right governance, and what are the right solutions that they probably would need to build minutely, or if they have a lot of sensitive issues, even build out the models themselves. But that's the kind of discussion I would expect. Many of these companies would start from point three and even stop without having the full-fledged discussion.
Outstanding. Look at that. Now everyone has a step by step roadmap for what they can do and how they can start to understand and put to real world practical application, generating value from these amazing technologies. Shivaji, it's been awesome to have you on the show. How would you like people to reach out to you? LinkedIn, we can share any links down below for you.
So I will share my LinkedIn, as you said, and also they can reach out to me on my website, techanddata.ai, at that venture, as you mentioned, and always happy to have any conversation with them and spare on how they can get on this journey.
Excellent. For everybody listening, make sure to share this content with those who you think would be relevant for, maybe business leaders who have gone through some AI implementations and seen some of the positives, but ran into some of the negatives. Maybe this can help to guide their path. So until the next episode, we will see you all then. Signing off. Thanks, Shivaji.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.